But yes, thank you everyone for joining us today for the Austin DevOps meetup. Typically, I have some slides to kind of show things to kind of walk through the conversation. Today, I do not have them because reasons. But I do want to, if you have the view in the Brady Bunch view, I would like for Boyd first to wave your hand. If you don't know who Boyd is, he's one of the organizers. And then Paul Czerkowski, raise your hand and or wave. He's the one with that is going to be doing the recording, and also another organizer. And we have a fourth organizer of Laura, who is not here with us today. We normally go through a couple of things first before I bring on our speaker. So let's talk about the first one, which is who is hiring, to give an opportunity to have anyone, if you are looking for someone in our scope, please use the raise your hand button, and I will unmute you and or you can speak, just so we're not all speaking together. So you can offer any positions you might have. I'll give that for a minute or two.
Hey, while people are raising their hand, including me, Paul Stenius. When you left Austin, you didn't have an epic beard like that. It's good to see you, sir. It's been a while.
Thank you. That's a COVID special.
Fair enough. Are you back in Austin, or are you just coming in remote?
I'm remote. I'm in Southeast Texas right now, and I'm going to be moving up to Michigan sometime this month.
Wrong time of the year to move to Michigan as a Texan, sir. Just
no kidding, no kidding. But it's nice to
Michigan?
Still be able to be part of the community and listen to these meetings remotely.
I just moved out of Michigan like 2 months ago. Where are you going in Michigan?
Grand Rapids.
Okay. Good place to move to. If you're going to move any place in Michigan, that's one of the two places I'd go.
I've heard.
So Ernest, you have raised your hand, sir.
I have. Howdy. So I'm, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Ernest. I'm currently managing a team at Verica, who is putting together a chaos engineering platform for enterprises and stuff to use. I in particular am running the Kubernetes module team, and I am looking to hire pretty senior Kubernetes developers to write chaos experiments and devise chaos experiments for Kubernetes. So feel free and hit me up if that seems interesting.
Awesome. Thank you, Ernest.
And if that question to me about the friend is, if that's to me, this is Lucy.
She seems sweet.
I cannot figure out how to raise my damn hand.
I feel like yeah. Hey, there we go.
It's on the participant. It's on the participant list. Yeah, there's a bunch of different places you can do reactions in Zoom, but this one's on the participant list too.
Yeah, I don't seem to have it, which makes me wonder if I'm a co-host and therefore, but every Zoom seems to work differently. Like this one works different from my corporate account, the whole 9 yards. Hey, I got a guy that's working for me that used to work for Ernest, who talks about how great it was to work for Ernest. So if you're, if you're wondering, should I give that guy the time of day? I'd say the answer is probably yeah. That said, I also have a pile of positions. I have 3 openings for cloud engineer. Basically, we're looking for folks with AWS experience who write infrastructure as code first. We have a chaos engineering program, which is to say that we'll go and just reboot a database in the middle of the day to see what happens occasionally with some guide rails. And I'm also looking for a cloud engineer with a serious Elasticsearch background. What we're looking for there is we've got to update our data stores. We've got some migrations to do. We need some design help, things of that nature. So we're really looking for somebody to come in, function as a subject matter expert, and be part of the team as well. So I've got all these, except the Elasticsearch job posted right now. Let me know if you're interested.
Thank you, Boyd. Do I have anyone else raising their hand? Or we can continue moving forward. Just as a friendly reminder, I'm going to put it into the chat right now. We do have our job board that I know Boyd has posted his jobs on there. Ernest, please, I encourage you to also post there too. This is we are taking it very seriously. We are keeping it curated, and we do have some people looking at it pretty regularly. So please, if you are thinking about looking at these positions, there's a good place to get the resources you're looking for. We've even had someone from India attempt to join and actually ask for a job there. I went ahead and made an executive decision to say I think he's a little bit out of scope of the Austin area. Just saying. Speaking of, this is an opportunity. This is just an opportunity. If you'd like to raise your hand and say that you are looking, please. I'm just, if you'd like to mention it, to say your skill set and or what you would like to be looking to do. I would like to give you opportunity to have the floor to talk about that.
Don, is your hand up?
No?
It better
Okay.
not be.
That's just me causing trouble.
All right. Well, and also I'd like to just reiterate on the job board, we do have a looking section too. So please, if you don't want to talk in front of everyone, that's absolutely fine. There's an opportunity to put your name also in there too, as someone looking for a position. So you just have another avenue, but in our community to do that too. So awesome. I believe that's all our major business. Am I wrong? This seems good. Do you want to get on to the main thing of the show? Main reason we're here?
Community announcements. What's Austin Devops doing? Or I'm sorry, what's Cloud Austin doing next, Ernest? Do you happen to know off the top of your head?
Yes, Cloud Austin is tomorrow, and we're doing a lean coffee style discussion.
Cool. Any topic in particular, or just open?
Nope, just open.
Outstanding. Any other things going on around the Austin tech community that somebody wants to talk about? Call out. All righty then.
Perfect. Well, I'd like to introduce Aaron Aldrich. Say hi, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron.
Yes, I really do love it when people do that. Please take it away.
Oh, all right. It's gone. So, hi, I'm Aaron Aldrich. I have been between DevRel positions for a while, so I'm starting to lose my mind and forgetting what it is I'm supposed to do here. But I'm back. No, we're here. So I've got to talk about resilience that JJ asked me to give here. So I'm going to try and find the correct window to share somewhere along the mess of my desktop. Did I win? Is it the correct one? I think
Yes.
so. Cool. And then I'm going to move my microphone, so hopefully you can still hear me while I face the camera instead of the other monitor. Cool. And then move all your faces because you're on the wrong screen, because Zoom does things whenever you switch stuff around. Perfect. So this talk was about resilience, and as I was thinking around, this would have been in like April that I first put this talk together. For the Deserted Island DevOps conference. If you haven't seen it, it was the one that happened entirely in Animal Crossing. I thought a lot has happened since April, so some of my talk had to be updated. So bear with me on that one, because I haven't had another conference to run that one through, but the whole beginning portion of the talk has been run through another conference. And then I thought I was going to get back and replace pictures, so it wasn't entirely Animal Crossing, which is completely out of place theme-wise now, but I didn't. So enjoy the theme and let it guide you on your path of resilience. So I want to start out with this quote from Terry Pratchett, author, who says, 1,000,000 to 1 chances crop up 9 times out of 10. Or how I think it's practical, another way I like to put it is, everything's a little bit broken all of the time, but it keeps working anyway, right? All those 1,000,000 to 1s, all those, it would take 1,000,000 to 1 chance to knock this out. That happens every day, all over the place, especially in huge computer systems where we've got like the giant chaos generating engine that is people using it. Right. Why? Why does it still work? And the reason we want to come through here is resilience. I think there's lots of characteristics about this that keep all of our systems running all the time. So this is a common word, and so we want to define it because resilience can mean a few things to a few different people. There is a paper that I link in the sources for this that I'm forgetting the name of right now. That's probably like How Complex Systems Fail, that talks about the 4 different modes of resilience. And the first way people think about is rebound. So resilience 1 is rebound. That's the ability to get back to normal after some surprise or some crisis happens. So when you have operational surprises, you can rebound back to some state of normal. But what's interesting is you dive into rebound, which we'll do a little bit later. You'll see where the work comes from. It continues there. Robustness is more about resisting change. And then where it really gets interesting is graceful extensibility and sustained adaptability. So wanted to get into some definitions, right? Return to normal after traumatic incident. But what's interesting is all the work for resilience happens before the actual incident occurs. You don't get better at rebound by doing work during the incident all the time. You have to do preparation work, right? It's all about having those backups, having the ability to cut over to failovers, having that. All that work happens outside of the actual incident context. Robustness, this is sort of about your known knowns, right? This is a large time where traditional monitoring takes place. This is where our traditional like system building techniques come in. This is where we're going to know that bad things are going to happen, and we're just going to absorb that impact and move through. But you have to know what those bad things are in order to prepare for them. So robustness really only gets us so far. Graceful extensibility is where we start to get a little bit more flexible and gooey with things, right? This is the ability of things to bend and shift and maybe degrade before they fall apart, right? This is how when you're millions of people streaming all over the world all of a sudden because they're all stuck at home for some reason, like maybe your quality degrades well before you stop being able to access Netflix, right? So there's some graceful extensibility that happens. And then sustained adaptability is really where this breaks out of the realm of computer systems and we start dealing with long-term planning and thinking. This is, people have sustained adaptability. Systems by themselves often don't, right? Because you're looking at long-term changes. You're looking at adjusting capabilities and that sort of thing. Which is huge and academic, and there's a whole like papers written on all this stuff. So I don't want to throw a ton of terms, but I do want to focus down on an example that's been given and given again and given again now from Redeploy 2019 last year, which was the Resilience Engineering Conference held in San Francisco. Dr. Richard Cook, who's one of the main folks, gives bone as the archetype of resilience, not just an example, but actually archetypical of resilience. Because it goes through some processes here, right? Bone is continuously created and destroyed. There's lots of different direction about this. It happens at all these different networks that are located at the cell level. It goes in to show how resilience engineering really exemplifies this. One of the main characteristics is you can do resilience engineering when you think of like a broken bone, right? Almost everyone's had a broken bone or knows someone that has. And when it gets fixed, well, doctors don't really do anything except put the bone back the way it should look and then hold it in place and let the bone fix itself, right? There's inherent resilience in the systems already there. What doctors have learned as far as 3,500 years ago, if we just create better conditions for the natural mechanisms to take place, they'll happen, and they'll happen well, and they'll happen better. We just want to encourage it to happen as good as possible. And within the past about 5 years, we started looking at actually digging into the systems themselves. How do we adjust the resilience reaction, which talks about the signals and bones. So there's a ton of content, and it's way more than I can fit in this talk. So go look up Redeploy and look up Richard Cook's talk, or DevOps Day Chicago from earlier this month. He also gave the talk about bone if you want one that's updated. So we want to talk a little bit about the systems we create, because they're not too unfamiliar from like body cellular networks at this point, right? Like this is a realistic representation. I'm pretty sure this is out of date. Is like the graphic that would have come up in a Netflix slide deck when someone says, so what does Netflix look like? And then they go, here you go, here's Netflix. These are legitimately the systems that we're building when you talk about DevOps. You're talking about huge amounts of network connectivity, lots of interactions, so much so that it's really hard to understand. There's signals going all the time back and forth. And a lot of times what we're working on is starting to exemplify these levels of resilience inherently. Like these can be built into your system. You can have auto scaling, right? You can have failovers. You can have recovery systems. You can have, load balancing so that it doesn't go down. Like all these fit into different categories. But where it really falls short is when it gets past that to the sustained adaptability. And this is why in DevOps especially, we talk about socio-technical systems rather than just like, how did I computer today? We talk about the human connection to that. It digs in a bit to Conway's Law. So if you haven't heard of Conway's Law, this is where you design systems that represent an organization's communication structure. Right? So this kind of goes both ways. It's also that the systems that we build look like us and we look like the systems we build. It kind of goes back and forth. We have that inherent connection to it because we communicate a lot of times in the same path. So I want you to think about something for a moment. So think about the systems you've created and go back in time. You can, if you want to like be very serious about it, you can close your eyes and imagine going back, but think about the last major incident that you had, right? Where stuff went wrong and like, more than like, you fixed a line of code and fixed it, like stuff was really bad. When you think about that incident, think about a couple things about it. One is where did it get surfaced? Was it just an alert that told you how bad that incident was, or did you have to dig in before you really understood what was happening? Who are the people that worked on it? And that can be all sorts of people involved all over the place, not just engineers, but where else was involved. So you might have had people that were higher up that communicated about it. And think about where the actual solution for that came from. Did that solution come from like a new company policy or like an engineer who's hands-on all the time, intimately familiar with the system, who discovered how to resolve the issues and what was going on? So I have some assumptions here, but the whole idea of this exercise is to go into an example of the sharp end and the blunt end of the system. The sharp end is the part that's closest to the work, and the blunt end is removed from the experience. These are common terms you run into if we talk about resilience engineering. This will come up a lot. And what often we find is that decisions happen at the sharp end. And if you look at what occurs there, these are the folks who are constantly building and destroying systems. They've got strong signaling between each other. You often know how to communicate with your peers very well. And they improve systems based on strain, right? Like when you have a system that's falling over, that's the one you're going to work on. And you do so naturally given ownership. This is proven by a couple of studies that I also don't have time to talk about and prove, but they're out there. So J. Paul Reed also at Failover Conf earlier this year said teams that do well dealing with impact, the surprise at incidents, are those that have a strong common ground. So we're looking to get better, take those folks at the sharp end and make them even better at doing what they do. We want to improve this common ground, right? This is what I've said. If that's true and we want to improve the team's resilience, let's build that common ground. So how do we do that? What is the common ground and what do we look into? The idea with the common ground is a basic compact. This means the basic sort of rules of engagement, like I am here to do this. It's especially important with the basic compact to say you're not available, right? So if you're SRE for a company right now and you need to step away because family stuff, because it's just a lot right now, which seems kind of fair, that's important to be communicated with the rest of the group because you need to make sure that we have a clean understanding of what's going on. So not only is the basic compact important just for the agreement, but especially if you're going to have to step back, it needs to be communicated. Because that goes to goal alignment and commitment, predictability, and sustain and repair. And this is sort of the interesting thing about any community that starts going is you'll find they want to continue to maintain that community, right? When someone does something, it hurts the group as a whole. And so we want to get back to a point where everyone has that goal alignment, where it's interpredictable again, and we're agreeing to the basic compact. Those groups will try and return back to that status all the time. So some of the things we do now are things we talk about. Blameless postmortems. I think if you haven't heard of blameless postmortems in DevOps, you should look it up at this point. But it's a thing we talk about where if we're going to figure out what's going on after an incident, we want to be focused on learning and improving and growing, building that resilience rather than figuring out, oh, there's a scapegoat, right? We'll talk about how there's no root cause. We'll talk about how finding a person to blame ends the learning that happens, right? It actually interrupts the amount of resilience that you can get. I don't know if I mentioned it in this talk, so I'll remember as my slides go through because I'm got notes. Anyway, you can't share Keynote. It's a whole thing. So Rain Heinrich from I forget where he's working now, but he's on the Greater Than Code podcast, and he also did a talk at Redeploy talking about beyond blameless, and even saying that the way we talk about blameless now can go a little bit further. But again, there's a whole talk dedicated to that. You should just check it out, Beyond Blameless from Redeploy. Chaos engineering is part of it, right? Because chaos engineering helps us actually test that common ground that we have. It allows us to work together for a common goal and with the express purpose of learning, right? Game days are another way that we do that. We start building that work together. And I think there's an example of modeling vulnerability. This comes a lot from the Beyond Blameless aspects and things like that. But as anyone who has the position of leading on that team needs to be able to step into owning those things like, hey, I made this change in production before this thing broke, and here's what happened, right? Like being able to step out and doing that, or being the person that says, hey, you know what? I need to take this Friday off because life's too much right now, and I need to be the one to step back. And like modeling that openness and modeling that is really, really important to the whole group understanding and like making that behavior acceptable. And this is shown in a number of studies. You've probably seen this. This is like the what are the 5 characteristics that make a high-performing team that was researched on Google Teams. And number 1 is psychological safety. It always is. This is the main thing, right? The team members have to feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. That's what helps build that common understanding and you working together as a unit, right? As opposed to a bunch of people working on a different task. We want to be safe to work together and be our full selves in that role. Because we'll find those risks, right? This is all coming from the sharp end. When stuff starts to change, when things are operating outside of our normal in the realm that we need that graceful extensibility and resilience to happen, people need the freedom to make those choices that are outside the normal, right? They need to be able to choose weird things. There's a whole other talk about building psychological safety as well. It just so happened they all happened at the same conference when I wrote this one. So if you grab the screenshot here and watch this talk later, this completely dives into building the team and building psychological safety amongst your team and like where that can go and how that can help out. Resilient teams build resilient products. Rain Hendricks again says resilience is all about creating the conditions that maximize everyone's potential. This is the main thing because that resilience, again, it comes from people, not from the systems that we build, but the people being able to build those systems and being able to make the choices and being able to say, hey, this looks weird. I need to go change stuff now in production and that being okay.
Hey, Aaron.
Yeah.
I hope I don't steal your thunder, but it seems like it's worth pointing out explicitly that part of the psychological safety is the safety to fuck up big and bad and not end up having somebody blame you for it. Because when you are out there making those decisions outside the box, you're inherently taking big risks, and those are your career.
Absolutely, and I think that's what comes into play. Of the blameless postmortems are a big part of that. That also comes from for them to really work, right, the whole culture needs to be on board with this. We need to have this culture that's understanding, like our goal here is to learn how to get better at it and not to blame someone for we don't want to blame someone for the fuck up to cut someone's head off and call it a day. And they're like, great, I can wash my hands of it, right? If that's your goal, you will not build resilience, right? You're going to build people that hide stuff from you. You're going to not understand the weak points of your system because people will hide them. They may or may not fix them for fear of losing their job. So to build resilience, you're absolutely right. It has to have that safety to make those big decisions and to have that discussion after it, and understand like everything that goes into it. That's why understanding blameless postmortems intimately and the culture that leads to that. Just culture is a more generic term. If you're looking for studies that exist outside the tech world, like in medical culture, Brigham and Women's Hospital did a whole study on just culture and implementing that and trying to reduce the amount of medical errors. And they're talking about like giving people the wrong medication and they die, right? Like these are the error levels they're talking about and how building this just culture and this blameless culture actually reduced the number of errors rather than the stricter like punishment for getting it wrong. So that's a whole thing. I think there's a whole talk of it. That's probably like another DevOps Days talk, but I don't have that one referenced off the top of my head. Cool. Thank you. Yes. So I love abstract image slides that only mean something for me. So this model that I had, at one point, sort of going into COVID, for how resilience layers and how these intercommunicating multi-layered networks kind of interact. My initial thought was like, oh, if you have a small system, thinking like, oh, your computer program, when that fails, it sort of fails up, right? Then the people kind of take over and they sort of enact some resilience. And if this person, like maybe you're on call, tech can, it goes back to the team. Maybe that team fails a little bit to a larger and larger group. Was sort of my initial thought. And it can happen that way. Like it definitely does, right? Like there are definitely incidents that started as the computer system should have fixed it and it didn't. And so now the whole company's involved. Like that occurred somewhere. Where this larger network of smaller things had to all come into play to make it to fix the problem. But we've sort of seen another model happen where lately we've seen really, really big systems sort of not do the thing they're expected to do. So what happens then, right? Like what happens when the really, really big thing fails to do what it's expected to do? And that was the thing all of your other small cellular layered networks depended on. Like what happens when the government stops responding, right? That's sort of a really interesting turn to resilience. And this is why it's really interesting to talk about the people. So at the time of writing this is also at the beginning of COVID. So what we're looking at here is it's left to us. What I want to get at is community building is resilience engineering, right? Like this is what we're seeing going forward, that the strong communities have been really resilient in the time of COVID. These strong communities are diverse. They've got lots of different groups of people who have lots of different backgrounds and incomes and can maintain all that, lots of different skill sets, high trust and safety. They're sustaining and repairing themselves. They have interpredictability, loosely coupled layered networks, right? Like these are what we're talking about when we're talking about building strong communities. And this can be our DevOps communities. It can be our neighborhood communities, wherever it is. These are the goals of how they become self-sustaining, because you have all these different people, right? You've got a lot of different skill sets. When you have high trust and safety and sustain and repair, you can rely on each other instead of having to rely on the systems that would do things themselves. So the time we were talking about this was April 30th. So this was the school district near me. What happened was they already have a number of free meal programs. They began just rolling that out for all children under 18, basically in the town, in the school district. They will just deliver food. So that started happening during the school year because a lot of, in our region is fairly poor. So we have something like 46% of the student population qualify for reduced or free lunch. So this is a big deal. Like there are families that depend on the fact that they're paying pennies a day for food for their kids. So this got delivered for free. It just happened. Stores offer shopping time, right? Like this occurred. And this was a policy that didn't get handed down. They just decided to do it. And whatever you want to think about stores, nevertheless, they created some way for people to get what they needed. People creating masks for healthcare workers, right? Or sewing their own masks, which happened during the massive respirator shortages. What happens when they're not available? Well, we got to make it. Let's do it. And then what happened is what happens when people aren't working, right? And they're threatening to lose the places they live because they can't get a job because they've been fired and no one's hiring and no one can leave their houses, but rents still do. So yeah, there's this podcast is really good. This is from, I'm trying to remember which this one is because these hosts do a bunch of stuff. Okay. This one is from Worst Year Ever, the Worst Year Ever podcasts. They had a whole episode on how to save your community when the government fails, which actually talks a lot about building solidarity, talking about how do we prep ethically. I don't remember if that was this one or another one, but it gets a lot into the community building, a lot about how the goal here is always, how can I provide for other people, right? Like if something goes wrong, how can I make sure that my neighbors have what they need? How can I make sure I can build my community? So that was where the talk kind of stopped before diving into more personal stuff, but I guess a lot has happened since then. I don't know a good way to talk about it because I think there's really important examples that happen here. And I want to give some content warning in that I am going to talk about the protests and I'm going to flip through images because I think it's important that they're there. And I think it's important to have discussions about what happens when the default systems like our city governments aren't working? They're not doing the things we're expecting them to do. Because that's like, right? What happens when our major systems aren't functioning? And how relying on people can help with that. So yeah, like this all happened since it was April 30th. So there was a whole month, and then this happened the end of May. And this still happened the end of May. And this was the end of May. This happened. I think we're in June now. This photo op occurred sometime around the beginning of June. This is in DC in front of a church. So what was the response, right? If protesters weren't resilient, it would be over, right? Because clearly there's resistance, and it's not small. It's not exactly like people are meeting with someone saying, hey, I wish you would go home, or like you might lose your job. Clearly that's not what's happening. So what does that look like? And one looks like a row of mothers lining up and saying, hey, maybe our faces will make a difference. They got better at defending against tactics being used on them. This is a row of shields in Portland and gas masks. You notice they've upgraded a bit since day one. That there was no mandate that did this, right? There's no top-down policy. This is people deciding on how to respond to what's going on. And the protests in Portland, by the way, have been going on for, what is this, 110 days, 109 days in Portland now. It's important to know this, like, because this is what's happened over having protests day after day, continually building and destroying these communities over and over again, and trying again over and over again. It's changed. It's interesting. They build aid stations, right? Because we need to support the people that are there too. So this is for medical attention and for water and for whatever else you need. Aid stations get set up. Medics are there because that's important, that people are safe as much as they can be. Of course, you know, tactics change. So how do we build the communities, right? That's a lot about what's happening in these exact moments. That's sort of interesting. But what about the community then? Okay, because it's not just about this moment, but it's about the community these are happening in as well. And it's important to see that this is real buildings and real things that have happened. And if you look in the corner here, you can start seeing people with hard hats and brooms. And this was this type. I got this picture off of Wikipedia, because Wikimedia is great and open sourced. Not open, well, you can use it. But this is called the Broom Crew, which I thought was great. I thought this was a great name. But it shows people are here, right? Because it's not just in that moment, right? This continued on after the fact, and people need to make sure their community is safe and need to make sure it's continuing on. So they start cleaning up, right? And it's not, the city didn't bring in a cleanup crew. People had to clean up because they wasn't there. The government wasn't there. There's still a lot of places were recessed or holding special sessions or haven't yet called an emergency session to deal with the problem. The policy wasn't going to fix it. And I think there's a lot of blamelessness is one way at touching at how the emotion and like the heart of people is important as well. And it's important on these communities and it's important on your teams. There's a grief process that had to happen here as well. There's grief process that have to happen for these communities. And they're not happening successfully. They're not. It's another debate I'm going to try and avoid touching on, but they need to express it. Grief needs to be expressed. It needs to be expressed on teams too. I've heard another talk about a lot of what we're going through, even just in COVID, feels like the grief process because so much of our way of life has shifted and altered out from underneath us, right? There's only so much we can deal with individually, and we need the group and the community to come together and say, hey, we can all be in this together, right? And this is a way of showing that solidarity and showing the support when individually we can't do it individually. Some experimentation with autonomous zones, sort of interesting. So this was talking about the New York City, what was it? Chapel Hill Autonomous Zone, unless I'm mixing them up, which is very possible. It started somewhere around like June 29th or the end of June or something like that. And they're talking about how within like a week, by July 1st, they were offering free COVID testing at this autonomous zone, right? And so again, the reason it's interesting about an autonomous zone is that there's no policy that happens here. There's no top down, there's no directive from the bigger system. These were humans seeing a need in their community and made it happen. This movement's occurred, sort of interesting. So there's a response now from, especially, we've heard in Minneapolis, the response that this current system that we have isn't functioning. This is the statement that we're making. And we want to see massive changes, not just, oh, we need to try and improve the system. We need to try and tweak it. We need to try and do this. No, this is saying this system is fundamentally not working for us as a community. We need to rebuild it in a different way. It needs to do something different. We need to look at what was it supposed to do and how can we do that thing better? Like we do this every day. How many times we look at massive, like monolithic legacy computer systems and go, this thing doesn't do the one thing it was designed to do. We need to figure out what the purpose was and design something better. Yeah, anyway. And then it's interesting that the community reached out and they saw change with their government. They're from the bottom up, the groundswell made change. Of course, there's other issues further up the line, but it's interesting to see where it gets. And of course, things keep going. This is now we're in Kenosha, which happened recently. So we didn't have to wait a number of years between our next sightings. We can get them more than one in a year. All right, let me pause for a minute because it was really heavy and I need a break, need a breath. And that gets into the next part, is that we can't sustain being heads down in this all the time. And someone really smart, who I'm good friends with, said, sometimes the first thing we have to do to take care of our communities is take care of ourselves. And be gentle with yourself. And this is a hard one for me too. Or put it another way, you can't pour from an empty cup. Because I get it. I see lots of things I want to do and lots of things I want to fix. And it's really tempting to dive in and try to do all of the things yourself, which will continue to drive us right into, like, this is the hero culture that we talk about, right? This is the on-call burnout that we talk about, is trying to be the one that's continually pouring in and continuing to fix that thing. So it's important to remember that we need time for ourselves as well. I wrote a whole other blog specifically on that topic shortly after Failover Conf, because we were talking about cognitive load was the concept that came up that Paul Reed was talking about. And the concept of cognitive load is when we get to a certain point, we are overloaded and we have to start making certain choices. Either we can start slipping things in time. So, we delay stuff until we can fit more. We can drop stuff, right? We can say, oh, I'm not going to do this in order to fit everything into my capacity. You can recruit help. And you can, a fourth thing, which I'm completely you can sacrifice thoroughness, right? So you can, rather than being completely correct, maybe you take shortcuts and get through. And this came up also with the argument that all of us right now are probably, the phrase was, all of us right now are probably sacrificing thoroughness. And I said, if that's true, all of us right now are operating at maximum cognitive load. If at any corner of your life right now, you're saying, I'll get to that later, or I can't be as thorough as I used to be, or now that it's COVID, I can't, that's because you're at full capacity now and you can't fit anymore. And one of the arguments was letting things slip in time, letting things slip in time or recruiting resources. A lot of these, when you're dealing with it in a work context, you have to renegotiate some of the agreements, right? Can I borrow people from your team to help me complete a project? Like, that's going to have impact. I have to have a conversation about that at a higher level. But we don't have to have that conversation with ourselves. And this whole blog post is as we're diving into the world where work and home are kind of smashed into the same physical space. It's hard to separate them mentally and emotionally. And what happens is we end up borrowing resources from us. So this is the concept I talk in the blog, is we have to be cognizant of the fact that I borrow from my home time all the time when I'm working from home, and it's really bad and unsustainable. That's the short of it. Think about it. I get into a little bit more if you want to read about it. Part of it is just do fun stuff too, like do Zoom chats with your friends where a bunch of them happen to be wearing the same shirt. because they're organized at the same conference, and so they screenshot each other and make each other's pictures their own backgrounds to a level of inception. Animal Crossing was real hot at the time, but super relevant as an example of how we can help with self-care. What I found in the example here, and things are all different because COVID regulations are different everywhere now, and everything's bizarro world. But at least in Animal Crossing, I know I probably can't get COVID, and I can not just talk to my friend through like voice chat, but we can physically have avatars in the same place, which sounds totally silly. And you want to be like, oh, it's like, oh, look, I've got a puppet and you've got a puppet and we're just doing but it means a lot. Like when you can kind of interact on a nonverbal level feels like slightly more real. And so like make efforts to find ways to interact with friends that are not just like through video chat and flat world, as was mentioned earlier. I do virtual karaoke too. Super fun. That's it. That's all I got to say about it. You should do it. Conferences, I pointed out Deserted Island DevOps is a great example of like something kind of funny and irreverent while also having a lot of seriousness baked into it. Like that's really good right now. Inject whimsy. There's another great conference talk from Tiffany Longworth was tactical whimsy injection. I think if you look up like tactical whimsy injection and like DevOps days, you'll probably find the talk. It's good, but it's about how to just insert whimsy into your sort of day-to-day. And this was another talk from Deserted Island DevOps that is about self-care. It's a good one. It's a good one. When you're feeling down, you should watch it, or just for fun.
Take notes.
So that was my short of it. Enable potential and get out of the way. That is the gist of resilience. Let everyone get really good at doing what they're really good at, and then let them do that and enable them as much as possible. You can find the old version of these slides at speakingcrazy.com right now. I'll update it with the correct resources and everything we talk about here. And it should be up probably by tomorrow. I'll have that updated. Check out these other things on the left. And that's my actual license plate. It does in fact say DevOps. So, you know, I'm an authority on it. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Aaron. That was phenomenal. It really, truly was.
Thank you.
So, do we have any questions for Aaron while we have him still for a few moments?
Yeah, Aaron, I've been working on this theory of two systems. I'd like to get your take on it.
Yeah.
If we're going to build a platform of software, the people that are going to build that are a system.
Yeah.
And if we don't put the thought into engineering that system for things like resilience, Conway's law means that we're going to end up with a crappy platform. And so I'm trying to make the distinction of system of people system and platform of technology, just to make it easier to talk about the two systems.
There's
Do you find any like interest in that idea at all?
Yeah. It actually echoes similar to the concepts of like above the line, below the line, sort of deeply in the other resilience realms. It's very Allspaw, who I'm sure has like a PDF ready to link to you. If I had him available, I would immediately have the paper ready. But he's not in the room, so I don't have it. But yeah, it sounds really similar to that concept. So the concept being like below the line is actually a lot of the computer black box stuff, the things that kind of operate that we have to really dive in and can only really interact with through abstraction. And all the above the line is actually a lot of the people interactions, the stuff we can see and touch and kind of understand how it works. But yeah, it gets into a lot of that about how those are different. They're not different because socio-technical, the systems we build are an extension of the people that use them and operate them. And it all kind of builds one big thing of smaller bits. But yes, I like, yes, I'm with you, but also I think there's, I'm hesitant to say engineering people systems, which is not wrong. It just feels impersonal.
Why does everything need to be personal?
Well,
if we can remove some of the emotion and some of the taxing things that happen to us emotionally from work, doesn't work become a safer place? And if it's a safer place, you can take more risks.
Well, I would argue that the option I would see is to be safer if folks didn't have to hide that, because people are inherently emotional and squishy and messy things. in that, like, if I have a shitty day at home, yeah, I could come to work, but like I had a shitty day and I'm going to continue to have a shitty day. And so that thing that might have kind of rubbed me the wrong way before might set me off today. And that's important to acknowledge and understand in that space as well. And like having an understanding and a picture and be able to talk about that creates a safer space that if we could just try to like, all right, let me just try not to be crappy right now, right? It's like if the whole rest of my world is on fire. It's important to be able to say, hey, my whole rest of my world is on fire. That's going to affect my work because that's what I'm bringing to the table today. So there's a lot of, I think, yeah, and I think it's important to capture and process some of the emotion that can crop up rather than try to avoid it, which is sort of gets into the beyond blameless concepts where it treats blame is less of a thing that you do and more of a feeling that you have. So blame as an example is like, if you, as an example, like JJ steps on my toe, I'm going to be like, F JJ, right? Like that's my first feeling, even though it's because he got pushed and I got knocked back and then stepped on my toe. And I like, and we learned that this, like, we need to spread out more, right? Like that's the overall takeaway was not JJ's a jerk, but I've got an initial reaction to what occurred. And rather than try to just ignore it completely, sometimes it's better to just deal with that and be like, what the hell? And then like, we can go through that and deal with it. Like, because the problem wouldn't be the blame that I feel. The what the hell isn't the problem in that situation. The problem would be if I said, what the hell, JJ, you're fired. So there's the sanction of you stepped on my toe, you get fired. That's the bad thing and the thing we don't want to create. And so that's what like Rain's talk gets deeply into. But it's also Rain Henrik. So there's going to be a lot of like philosophy documents linked that way, but he will very solidly make the argument for why he believes that is both true and the better way to operate from like a firm foundation of like logical thought.
Other questions for Aaron?
Let me find that. I can find that link actually while. Yeah. Yeah. Shut the entire country down. Hmm. So I don't think there's no magic bullet hiding in resilience engineering. I think that solves the problem, which I don't think is what you're asking, but yeah. Like I'm trying to think of some. Well, I'm trying to think if there's something that's been said that like what hasn't been said yet, right? Like this, I'm also trying to avoid. I don't want to like armchair epidemiologists as well. So like with all of that couching in place, what I think is the most valuable and relevant concept from it is these concepts of allowing folks at the sharp end of the problems, the people who are doing the work and are like there, have the autonomy and the decision making to like make changes to the policy on the fly as they're like, this is not working, I need to do anything, right? And there need to be guidelines and follow-ups when that happens. But I've seen to mixed response, but I'm going to use my state as an example because we all are stuck at home and only have local news. So for the way they're opening up the schools, a lot of what they did was leave it up to the school districts to make that decision, which a lot of school districts were unhappy that they were not provided a lot of guidance and resources. But the state effectively said, hey, here are your minimum requirements. Like, this is what has to happen. We're going to leave it up for you and your school to decide how that occurs. I think it worked out really well because I think communities get the chance to say, they're all pretty similar, but I know, for instance, our school district that we're in, they've already made the decision. They're doing like, hybrid back to school, but they've made the decision that says, hey, if this goes well, we're going to start moving this further. And like, here's how we're going to change to still meet these requirements, but try and take the next step forward if everything's working out. And they're given that ability to say, make that difference, or they're given the ability to say, hey, let's close this school rather than like shut the whole state down because one school had a problem, because it's not a blanket policy, right? It's left up to the individual districts and things like that. So that's probably the if I was going to pull one thing, that's probably the thing I would pull.
That's an interesting statement, though, because doesn't that presuppose that the schools have enough information and expertise to make the decision at the right time for the right reasons?
So I, not being involved in it myself, I don't know the extent of the resources available or not available. It makes
Can't
the
you just
assumption
look
that
at what they pay
schools-
teachers to know that they don't have those resources? Or look at the state of our understanding of math to know that they don't have those resources? Our math collectively as a society.
Well, maybe I'm missing the question then.
Well, so to make an epidemiological decision about whether or not to open a school, to what extent to open a school, particularly when schools are designed, I was a teacher for 10 years, to put kids in close proximity. The actual buildings are designed that way.
So there's guidance on, like, the overall guidance on must maintain X, Y, and Z distance and this, that, and the other thing. Like, there is guidance at that level from the state, but you're going to split your class exactly this way, and here's how you're going to do it, and here's how you're going to do remote, and here's, like, that wasn't provided. It's very much just like, here are the safety guidelines, right? Like, people have to wear masks, people have to be this far apart, right? Like, these are the things that they're given. Like, here are the health conditions you have to meet in order to maintain this. But right, and I don't know about closing a school or things like that, but they're allowing the decision to be made on closer to local levels. For instance, we know that our school district is saying that if everything goes well, they're going to take the younger kids and try and move to. They're trying to get rid of the virtual class for the younger kids, like have the availability to be in school all day, for anyone that opted for any in school. So there's already a bunch of people that said, we're just doing virtual and we don't want to be a part of it. And like, cool, great. That's not even considered right now. We're going to cut that out of our equation. But because so many people really rely on the schools for childcare and for food, it's a big deal, especially for the elementary schools, to be open and be accepting students.
So what you're saying, I think, is given a system of policies by a broader and better informed organization, the implementation of those policies should be left to the smaller and more precise expertise of the people who have an understanding of those policies. For instance, wear a mask 6 feet apart. Schools given that can then arrange how many kids can be in a school at a given time on their own for what's right for their local community.
Yeah, exactly. And prioritize the needs for their local community. Like I said, they're prioritizing getting the elementary schools back to full-time first, because if I've got a 12 or 13-year-old, they can stay home while I go to work. But like my 8-year-old needs to have somebody, right? He can't be home alone. So, right, that makes sense, right? The way that they're looking at that, especially for communities that rely on schools as a social service, right? That's how they can make ends meet, is the school exists. Yep. Right. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. And yes, I think it's why you get into like why all of these conversations eventually touch on like organizational culture and things like that, because eventually you have to start talking about like, well, what does it look like for this team to operate, and what happens when that team does something that no one was expecting them to do, right? Like, and then it dives into that.
Last year at the 12 days of, the 12 clouds of Christmas and the Cloud Awesome meetup, there's a guy named Matthew Brahms who gave a talk on chaos engineering, except that he wasn't talking about technology at all. He had 5 experiments you could do. And I remember one of them being take your most knowledgeable person and have them lie 20% of the time for a week and see what happens. And that idea keeps coming back to me through the things that you're saying. Provide misinformation into your system of humans and see what happens, and then carefully rectify the problems that it creates, because that human could become a problem, if nothing else, the bus problem, right? I found it absolutely fascinating, the idea that you would inject fault into the people, as like as we consider injecting fault into technology.
The real trick is that between Paul and I, one of us always lies and one of us always tells the truth. That's you have to figure out which door. That's a different. Yeah, but definitely with people. I think there's been a little bit of a conversation. I think even it might have been Pager Judy. I don't know. Someone who deals with this stuff. Talk about in the game days that like one of the things you can break, one of the systems you can break is people, right? Like what happens if this person's not available? What happens if this isn't around? You had mentioned disinformation, which is the only thing that like triggered a flag for me for a moment, is that I would be careful of, I wouldn't subvert any team trust, I guess, if that makes sense. Like even if it's as an experimental thing, breaking that trust, even as a, well, what happens when this occurs is really, really hard to fix, especially if it was done as a, let's see what happens if I lie to you. Like, oh, how can I trust the other things you say now, right? Like that's caused a challenge there, I think, that will break more team dynamics than it will fix. And I think it's important, like when they talk about chaos engineering, that it dives into, it's not surprised. No one is like, wow, that incident was rough. And then it's like, actually it was a chaos experiment. Like never, ever. It should always be like, tomorrow we're going to break this thing in this way, and we're going to find out how to fix it. Right. It should always be very clear what's going to happen and what's affected and all of that, so that there's the ability to andon court out of it, right? To say, hey, this experiment's bad. Let's put everything back where it was. And everybody who touches that has to know that it's occurring in order to be able to do that.
Brings up an interesting point. We call it a chaos experiment, but if we're really doing science, an experiment starts with a hypothesis.
Yep.
There's a clear set of steps to follow, and then a clear result that you're expecting, and the data to back it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think constructing, I wish Matthew was here. I'd like to poke him about, he had safety measures. I just don't remember what they were, to your point of you just don't go off and lie. Right.
Right.
But you build a safety framework around that, so that people are aware that you're going to reboot the database in production for the first time ever tomorrow.
Right.
Before you go and do it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I think that hypothesis is a good point. That it's easy to lose that in the fun of like, let's take down entire availability zones and see what happens. But yeah, it is important. I think even saying things like experiment helps in that as well. Thinking it like, before I go induce chaos, I should have some assumption about what's going to happen when I do that. Like there should be a hypothesis before you start. That's how you know whether or not your experiment worked. And how like a lot of it is remapping mental models, right? Like you have some picture of, hey, this is how my system works. And everyone has probably a slightly different version, and all models are wrong, but most of the time they're useful. And so when we do chaos experiments, it's really that test of saying like, in my mental model of our system, here's how it behaves when we make this change. Let's go ahead and make that change and see if that's true. And then when it does something weird, you go, whoa, I just learned a lot today. So yeah. Mm. so marketable. I think it depends on which crowd you talk to and whether or not they have degrees from Lund. But which is the sort of inside joke of a lot of so there's a whole resilience engineering community, and resilience engineering is a multidisciplinary field that's 20 plus years old at this point, and expands from air safety to forest fires to medical to computer technology. But what's happened that's really interesting with computer technology is we generate failure really fast. And so we iterate on failure really fast, which has made it really interesting thing to study for resilience engineers, is study what happens in the computer industry. Because computer engineers can just fail and rebuild a thing over and over again. We break and destroy systems constantly. It's our jobs. Break it and then make it better. So yeah, it's really interesting the way that all works. And so if you lean towards like the resilience engineering crowd, they're probably a bit more academic, will be very hesitant to throw terms around that do not have a textbook definition. And when they do, they will give you the textbook definition of the term and like very clearly using it that way. Versus like the chaos engineering marketing monster that has been created, which is just going to go full bore on chaos. I'm going to bet.
You used a really interesting word, Aaron, of safety, right? So all of this seems to be rubbing up against safety culture, but there also seems to be a distinction. Am I seeing a distinction with a difference, or should I really be viewing these things through the same lens?
At least similar lenses. Safety, like the safety 2.0 and like safety differently are all conversations that have happened inside the resilience engineering realm. And the people that are, what was it, Sidney Decker and Richard Cook were part of that conversation when they talked about, I think Safety Differently is either the book or the movie documentary they released about safety. And a lot of these concepts come from there about when I talk about the sharp end and how folks naturally gravitate towards like building their systems more resilient. That's from the Woolworths study, which if you haven't heard was Woolworths is a grocery chain in Australia. Yeah. All right. So what they did was they decided like, how do we do safety? And they split it into 3 groups. One group was going to keep doing it the way they did it, which is, safety managers and safety briefings and all the classic stuff you would think of in a grocery store. One group, we're going to just get rid of everything and tell them they can do what they want. The third one, we're going to get rid of everything, tell them they can do what they want, and give them some brief background in like resilience and safety, like give them a crash course in that, and so they can understand it. And ultimately what happened was the third group did the best, like even through all the controls they didn't just pick like the top tier stores. Like they made sure like, here's the crappy store that's probably not going to be on board, they're going to go in that group, right? Like they did all that kind of stuff to control for it. Consistently found the groups that provided power to the people actually working and actually encountering and dealing with the consequences of safety naturally were more resilient and would create rules that were better than trying to create the top-down policy. So that's where all that concept comes from. And yes, it's very much safety 2.0 and all that. Right. I forgot to just shorten the word to the first syllable and add a Y. Or an A, I guess, right?
So it seems a bit, I'll say contradictory that, so you mentioned policy in the Woolworth study. I always think of Alcoa, right? So the notion that we need safety as a key indicator comes from the top down, and then that's the policy. The implementation, like you were saying earlier, on a different topic, happens, call it at the ground level. But you seem to be saying something different this time in terms of the power of policy making to the people, or did I misunderstand you?
So instead of it's and if I may speak, there is an actual experiment that has the correct words in it somewhere, but I'm trying to go from the memory with it. But the gist was they removed the specific policies, like you must wear such and so as shoes and must not be within this, and this is how we have to mark that, and you must stand on a ladder this way and you have to do that. Like they got rid of all of that, but still have the mandate for safety, but let the people actually doing the work to say, hey, this is the correct and safe way to do this for our task and a handout we need. It both serves our needs and makes safety easy to do, right? Like how many times is the problem is like, well, the policy is fine, but it's very counterintuitive to how someone works, or it's hard to do. You have to think about it and like make the easy way make the right way the easy way, right? So there's a lot of that ability, I think, when you allow the person that has to do it 1,000 times a day to figure out what's the most efficient way to be safe at their job, versus someone who says, well, everyone has to have, I don't know, I'm terrible at hypotheticals, right? But like, you have to have a safety harness that keeps you so far away from the machine, but also that restricts me from being able to reach the one material I need. So I have to keep unbuckling and buckling all day long, right? Like that's a crappy safety policy because it makes work hard. And if it's going to make work hard and someone has to choose between keeping their job or being safe, unfortunately,
So what I'm walking away with is policy comes from the leaders of the department, the company, what have you. Implementation comes from the teams who are affected by that policy.
I think that's a good shorthand with like probably lots of asterisks and nuance that involve the details of things that I'm just not exactly on. But yeah, I think absolutely that's a great shorthand for like shifting power towards the sharp end of a system. Yeah, for decision making.
It's interesting that your shovel, the sharp end of the system is where the work is happening. The actual work, if you think about it in terms of physics, is actually at the handle. That's where the energy is going in.
Fair.
So,
but I need an illustration to show that one end is sharp and the other end was not.
well, no, I mean, when you think about it, there's a lot of energy and thought that goes into that policy, right?
Yeah.
The creation of that policy so that it can enable that sharp end to do what needs to be done. That handle was designed that way for a reason, I guess, is what I'm saying. I don't think the analogy you gave breaks down in the least. I just think I've been thinking about that since I saw the picture. I was like, wait a minute, where's the work actually happening? So, so it's just like you say, more nuance and whatnot. But I'm an engineer, so it has to be 7 words or less. It has to be tautologically, stated.
Sure, right. Stated tautologically, you mean?
Well done. It seems like Paul and I have just been having a discussion with Aaron. Would anyone like to contribute a question? Anything like that?
Well, okay, so I've got a question. I'm all for empowering the people that are most affected, but how do you know they're not going to do something inherently stupid? I mean, a lot of stupid things do happen, right?
Sure. Like stupid things occur. I think the short of it is generally, and this comes to the strong common ground, right? And so if you've got a team that has strong common ground and agrees on the basic compact and contract of work, like no one's going to do something intentionally to break the system. That requires someone who's already outside of that. So naturally, the idea is the intent of these people is to support that system. That's what they do. Like the job as a systems operator, as a systems engineer, is to make sure the systems work. And if that's my job, like you can trust that that's what I'm going to try and accomplish and do it the best way possible. It's not to say folks won't make mistakes and people don't do stupid stuff, but that's what we're trying to learn. Like if it's truly a mistake and it was a stupid moment, I did a thing. Like that's a learning, right? We need to learn that anyway. It had to get learned at some point. And I think the empowerment is more valuable than trying to prevent every possible thing that could go wrong, because they're going to teach you how to avoid those issues or what happens to our systems when that thing goes wrong. Like when someone else has a short-sighted, when our whole team misses something and doesn't know about the stupid mistake we made, like how does our system deal with it? I think just empowering those people is just going to get better at it because they can learn, hey, I made this stupid mistake, but here's how I can recover from it. And now I know the next time I do something, I've got a method. I've got something, right? I've got some way to try and improve my resilience now the next time around it happens, and so on and so forth.
Let me give you a more concrete example then. Suppose I have a sharded key and it requires 2 keys in order to open the system intentionally on purpose.
Sure.
so that one person can't rob the bank, right? The
Right.
metaphorical bank. Okay, so I've intentionally implemented a sharded system, but then, you know, the really clever people who want to automate the opening of this and have to do it 150 times a day, write a script that uses the two different shards to authenticate to the system. So they bypass the entire sharding
Yeah, yeah.
mechanism. I'm talking about things that are actually happening.
So, I mean, that example isn't like they've created a safety problem and a resilience problem, right? And so I think that's the learning opportunity is like, hey, like we recognize that this defeats the entire reason we did this, right? And if we recognize that, then how can we get what you need, which is they need to be able to access that system consistently in an automated way, I assume, which is why they scripted it, so that they're not having to go dig these keys up and manually enter and do these things over and over again. And if they're having to access it consistently this way, like maybe a more efficient method needs to be built, right? There's the opportunity to learn why did they choose that shortcut? What was hurting that they chose that to alleviate the pain? And how can we work around that, right? So what's nice is they did a stupid thing and you know about it, and like it hasn't been exploited yet, as far as we know. Hopefully, knock on wood. I'll hope it's not been exploited. And if it has, then I'll say, well, it was a learning opportunity. And we found it, right? So we found a pain point and we found like a safety flaw that was created from that pain point. So I think it just gives opportunity to improve the resilience by you've accidentally chaosed it, right? Like we've worked around the safety mechanism.
So
Well, but that pattern's going to occur over and over. So, you know, if I have a pain point, I'm going to automate around it. And now I've just defeated the policy that was put in place to ensure security. And I get
Right.
why they did that, but I'm InfoSec. So, you know, hey.
Well, I mean, I think that's, and I think a lot of this pattern is the pattern of siloed orgs that are working at odds. And if you have engineering and InfoSec working towards the same goal of like, we have happy, safe customers, like we can work towards engineering that problem. I think as long as that becomes a goal for them, but as long as their goals of delivery are not the same and they don't have that same policy and incentive of security, it's always going to be at odds. But the nice thing is you at least figure out what's making it hard for them to do InfoSec. I don't know if there's always an answer. Like sometimes the answer is going to be a policy. Sometimes it's going to be, hey, here's what we got. But I think at least if we're working towards something and maybe even enlist them and say, hey, what can we do here's the safety we have to maintain. Here's the security we have to maintain. How can I ensure that we maintain that, but also make it so that you don't want to tear your hair out and like write a whole system to destroy all of the safety I've built, like just to get your job done, right? Obviously, like I'm impeding this. So how can we work together? And I think that's the big thing is trying to bring that together and align that goal. Because if it's got a mismatched goal, then the systems aren't going to be resilient towards each other, right? They're gonna counteract each other because you're each trying to do different things. Yeah. Right.
Is the system flawed because it allows the human behavior to begin with? I mean, it seems to me that we've discovered something that we should engineer the thing so the human can't do that, and then make sure that we give them a verbose enough error with a link to a wiki page somewhere that says this is how you do, this is how you actually access this system. I'm speaking in the ideal, of course, but
Yeah. I was gonna say like can't do the thing and time equals shadow IT, right? Like that's how you get where it is now. So yeah, absolutely. I think shadow IT is it's the surfacing of an anti-pattern within an organization, right? It's showing that there is a thing that wants to be accomplished by the people trying to accomplish it, and there are policies preventing it from occurring. So like addressing what that thing is and how to get at it is really important, right? Like I used to do this with consulting on like office stuff, and they, oh, we don't want people using all of our Wi-Fi bandwidth for Facebook. I'm like, great. So give them a public channel and limit their bandwidth. Don't tell them they can't use Facebook, because they're going to use Facebook. They're going to do it all day long. They're going to be on Wi-Fi. They're going to do it on their cell phone networks. They're going to be on Facebook all day. But if you give them the thing they want, and like people will make it easy, right? Oh, cool. I'll check the thing once in a while because that's all I really have bandwidth to do and all I have time to do. As opposed to trying to tamp it down, and creates this underground and this secret access point that gets plugged in somewhere, and now your whole network's down because you've got a loop somewhere because someone plugged it in because they just wanted to get on Facebook or stream something. Like, it's not worth it. It's not worth the security risk for someone to browse it. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I like that. I think there's lots of interesting things that come out of Netflix that are both good, and also some of the other policies are terrifying. But yeah, I think they definitely have the freedom and responsibility down, and clearly it has worked well for them.
I'd like to assert that we're conflating policy and procedure again. Maybe I'm being a pain in the ass here. I am being a pain in the ass here. We keep using the word policy when I think we're talking about procedures. In Bailey's situation, it sounds to me like the policy is that the database must be secure. The procedure that they went through to do that was the sharding. But it seems to me that the implementation of the procedure was either incomplete or doesn't actually accomplish the mission of the policy, and then must be rethought. There's probably also a policy that developers should be able to accomplish a thing within X number of attempts, minutes, tries, lines of code, what have you. The policies are essentially the guidelines, the framework within which we operate. The procedures are the things that we actually do, and they're the specification for doing them. That's the thing I thought you were arguing that we should be doing at the ground level when at all possible, the sharp end of the shovel, as it were. But we seem to be using the word policy, I think, when we're saying, well, the policy for, the policy of securing the database needs to be adjusted. Does it? Or is it really the procedure that we followed to secure the database?
I don't know. Let's find out.
Well,
I would think that's what you ran into. I think the fact that there is a discrepancy between expected and actual behavior surfaces the fact that there's a disconnect between policy and what's occurring. And if we're going to follow, I think, the road of blameless postmortem with the goal of learning versus just, I want to fix the problem. If the goal is to like not just fix it, but how can we get better and avoid it, then I think the important thing is to dive in, not just like we need to adhere to policy, but why did we break that? And then revisit all of the things around it. What did the policy want to accomplish? Because policies are just tools, just as well as, if we're talking in this case in defining policy as like the sort of directive of the company, right? Like this is how it should be. That's a tool as much for designing the system as anything else, right? If the directive is this database should be secured, that's on the table for revisiting if it's not, right? Like if that's the incident.
That's super important, because you pointed out a big flaw in my thinking. I was focused on, like you said, just solving the problem. And so I'm only looking at the procedures and implementation aspect of things. Mm-hmm. You're saying, but what if the policy is flawed? Right. Which is essentially, like a, hey, step outside the box, Boyd. And you're absolutely right. So that's really fascinating, because especially because I don't have the context in Don and Bailey's particular problem, right? So yeah, maybe the policy itself is flawed too. So yeah, look, you've got to think of the entire thing in total. And you called that blamelessness. I just call that good reasoning. But yeah.
Well, the blamelessness is not jumping in and saying the person who wrote that script is the one who did it wrong, and therefore get rid of them, get rid of the script, and we fixed it, right? Like, well, it does. It solves an incident, a safety incident. It doesn't fix the underlying like challenge, and it doesn't build resilience in that team. It just puts it back where it was.
Another,
Well, first, I'm not
it
saying
seems
they're
to me-
wrong because they need to. Yeah, go ahead, Don.
it seems to me there's a slightly different way of looking at it. Bailey first phrased the question as, how do you keep people from, if you give people power, how do you keep them from doing something stupid with it?
Yeah.
Okay. This is an example. Another way of looking at this specific problem is, what makes you think it's only people near the sharp end that do stupid things? That is, in this particular case, right? I mean, if you give power to people high up in the chain, farther from the sharp end, they can do stupid things too. In this particular, I mean, we can talk about this particular issue because, as Boyd suggested, Bailey and I both know more about what it's about than we can talk about this particular issue, and I don't think that's the main point here.
Oh, no, okay. I'm not saying that the people, I mean, humans are inherently flawed. We all make mistakes. So there's that. I'm not saying only the people in the trenches are making mistakes. I'm saying the policy was designed so that the key to the key store wasn't one person who could go unilaterally rekey the universe and then hijack everything. That was the intent of you know, and to Boyd's point, the procedure in this case was implemented so that one person, the policy is one person can't steal all the keys or rekey all the keys.
And yes, and you know, Boyd talked about the difference between policy and procedure, and he's right. But one of the things that happens a lot is that policymakers specify very detailed procedures that don't really work out very well. And that's, I think, what happened. I mean, in the specific case, that's the deal here, right? If you have an activity that has to happen potentially hundreds of times a day, and it's going to take two people coordinating for 5 minutes to do it, it's you know, it's a fool's errand. That's a bad deal. It's not going to work. Find a different you know, either make the policy broad enough that you let the people at the sharp end figure out how to implement it, or if you insist on doing it, you best think again about what your process is, because as you suggested, Billy, it's impossible to carry out that procedure effectively.
The way it's implemented, but if you unsealed the vault once and didn't have to do it 150 times a day.
If the policy is the database must be secure, then you can do that in a way that'll work. If the policy is you're going to enter keys this way and exactly like this, and by telnetting over there and yada and yada, yeah, that's hopeless.
Yeah, because that's not a policy at that point. That's a procedure or an implementation.
Right. It's
and
a procedure
and
written
it's
into a
coming from on
policy.
high. That's like trying to dig with to use Aaron's graphic earlier. That's like trying to dig with the handle side of the shovel, which means you're not going to get a very good hole and you're going to end up with cut hands.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, Jared, I see Jeremy actually has his hand up. Go, Jeremy, for
I
being
didn't know you could
polite.
do that.
Hi, my name is Jeremy. I'm teaching myself to code. I'm kind of just
Awesome.
my first meeting. Hello.
Hi,
I
Jeremy.
did have a question. Given what y'all are talking about, it seems like the OODA loop is definitely shortest, like at the pointy end of the shovel, like you're talking about. But the policies come from people who have like a better idea of the big picture. So I was just wondering what y'all have seen that has worked best with regard to like top-down goals being well communicated to the frontline people, but the frontline people being able to observe, orient, decide, act, and then start over again quickly to address these faults that are coming Did that make sense?
Yeah. I was trying to run through it again. So are you looking for like specific examples of good, where you've seen that good communication come from policy, but also still empowering folks to make those changes and whatnot?
Yeah, like I guess maybe not always outlying, but like an outlying example of how you've seen this done best.
I hate to lean on the previous example of being like, well, Netflix does a really good job. But Netflix does a really good job. I actually think if you dive into that like paved road concept that Paul was talking about, it kind of lays that out well, of saying like, yeah, here is the course and the direction, and here is what we've seen in our best practice, but you're kind of given the freedom to do what makes sense to you. The terrifying part of Netflix is like, if it's not working out, they'll let you go. Right. Like, so the minute that you're causing problems and like the thing you've stepped out of line isn't working for them, like it's done. Right. You get absolute freedom, but absolute responsibility for everything that you do. Meaning the buck stops at you and no one else. It's not like, well, they told me to. It's like, well, you made the choice. So yeah, I mean, that's probably the extreme example of a way that it works well. And I don't know that if I'm like 100% on how all of that functions as a company, but that's probably one example of how they both communicate what they want and like where they're going, and provide the empowerment for engineers at the sharp end to do what they need to do, but also have that policy control, right? They've still maintaining a level of control over that relationship and that connection. And I don't know if I think that answers what you were looking for, and I can probably dig for something else, but that was the first one that came to mind.
I just want to call bullshit on Jeremy for like dropping OODA loops and then claiming he's new to all this stuff. that was definitely a pro question.
Not from software.
We don't get that one until DevOps 201.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I find the question to be at the intersection of of a great deal of friction between. It's where the middle managers live, right? I don't ever get enough information from my executives until I get too much information from my executives. And the folks working for me often don't get enough direction until they get too much, because you're dealing with humans. So there isn't some prescribed and right way to do this. So I often find that if you're in a situation like mine, it's pretty cool. We get less information, we do our best, and then we can invite some form of red teaming exercise to go check and see if we actually are hitting the marks that we want to hit. So we've got, and that's where I think where the fault injection or chaos engineering or whatever the cool kids are calling it these days comes in, is that ability to when my security team says to me, hey, we're going to run a pen test, and my answer is, why are you telling me? Go run the damn pen test. Let me know what you find. So yeah, there's got to be checks to make sure we are hitting those right levels, and constant feedback loops, which is something in my organization we are struggling with. We don't have good feedback loops from me to from my level to the executive team, from my level down to the individual contributor.
Bailey, I was wondering, since you've observed this, what you think the best solution to the problem that you were talking about would be, because it seems like the guy who created the script to bypass the security probably observed that this wasn't working. Management just wasn't seeing it. I was wondering if you thought of a solution.
The solution is the solution is to throw away our homegrown system and adopt Vault. So with Vault, you unseal Vault exactly once. As long as that cluster remains up, it remains unsealed. You don't have to unseal it every time you spin up a new node, for example.
Again, I'm not sure this is if we want to run down this road, I'm not sure this is as useful, but I disagree with you about the solution, Bailey, because it just pushes it out one more level, which is where it is today. Right. We're not repeatedly unsealing the key store. We're repeatedly authorizing the clients of the key store. And that problem is, if you have 1,000 clients a day, you have to find a way to authorize them. I think the notion of, yeah, you got to automate that in a safe
No,
way.
each of the clients has their own secret zero that they use to authenticate to Vault, which is distinct. So every application has their own magic key, and you only have to unseal Vault once by using multiple shards to unlock it.
That's web scale.
Is that web scale? Eventually consistent. It's all eventually zeros.
You know, if you just
Yeah.
use DevNull as your database, it's a write-only database, but boy, does it scale. Just saying.
Yeah, you know, I come back to what I keep saying. Our business is other people's money. Yeah, that's not a good solution. It won't work well.
Oh yeah. That's solve the problem right there.
Oh, that's brilliant. Bailey, we need to talk about that. We need to take that to the guys tomorrow.
we need to create a GitHub project like Kelsey Hightower did for I forget what it was. But,
I appreciate Paul's write once, read something else method of storing data.
and it scales.
Yeah,
dude.
but I'm gonna say it needs to be at least dev view random instead of random.
All right. All right. Yeah.
All right, you guys. Let's wrap this up. First of all, Jeremy S. We would like to invite you back as our professional question asker for all future Austin DevOps meetups. I suspect you'll be getting traffic from Ernest Muller, who runs who's one of the folks running the Cloud Austin meetup, as well as also a professional question asker. I can't wait to find you in 5 years and see what you're asking, because I'm sure as shit not going to know the answer, but I'm going to want to. That was awesome, dude. So, Aaron, thanks very much for making the time, man.
Thanks for having me.
Coming in all the way from Vermont.
It was a long flight, but we made it.
But your arms aren't very tired this time, right?
No, thanks to the power of the internet.
There you go. There you go. So any final announcements? Remember, tomorrow night is Cloud Austin. You can find them on meetup.com. Anyone coming in late have a community announcement or anything like that? Darren's not here to talk about the Linux user group. Anyone know what's going on there?
They just met last week.
All right.
So you have to wait till next month.
Dang. All right. Well, and Aaron, at least while this COVID thing's happening, please feel more than welcome to join us virtually, because I'm sure you don't have enough Zoom in your life.
I was looking like, how can I add 3 more meetings to my schedule?
Yeah. So in any event, you all, every month you provide us with your trust in giving us your evening to provide content that you find interesting. Paul, JJ, Laura, and myself, we don't take that lightly. Thank you very much for your trust, and we'll see you next month. Y'all have a great night. I'll hang around for about 10 more minutes if folks want to stick around and jibber jabber, but there is no obligation.